Hi everyone. I would like to thank first all the organizers and partners of the Arts, Culture and Management Conference related to revisiting borders. Today we are going to see with me at least the REinterpret borders. So I'm Elisa Ganivet, Doctor of Philosophy, art historian, cultural manager. And it's an honor for me to present my research, Border Wall Aesthetics, which was my PhD subject in 2009. Since 2003, I'm focused on contextual and artistic practice linked to societal and political phenomena. So usually I'm going to the fields to understand the impulse of the respective territories. So my last book, I'm going to show you the picture. Hopefully I hope it's going to, yeah, this one. My last book, Border Wall Aesthetics, Artworks in Border Spaces, published by Transcript Verlag and the Columbia University Press, is the updated and light summary of my PhD. In 2009, long before the migration crisis in Europe and before the nationalist and isolationist retreats of states, I made a very simple observation. In a period of so-called globalizations, why are we seeing a growing increase in separation barriers? A new relationship to the state borders began to be established. The border, as a wall, imposed a static, archaic device of rejection of otherness, of preventing free movement of the rights of asylum. Ultimately, only economic and technological interests were eased. Now we know that this is precisely this kind of globalization that creates these border walls. The fact is now clear, but it was not at all the case in 2009 when I started the research. So today my investigation, because of the COVID crisis and the relationship with the wall, we have all experienced the isolation between four walls is extended. For border wall aesthetics, the main first questions were: what is globalization? What is a border, a nation state? What is geopolitics? The border ensures the authority of the state over a defined territory, internal and external recognition of governments, a monopoly of their means of coercion and a given population. Legitimate borders are porous, but today we have 70 closed borders, meaning 40,000 kilometers. I show you here a map made by Elizabeth Vallet. Helped me a lot. She's associate professor at the UK in Canada. Here, so 70 closed border. And they are all of all types: anti-immigration, anti-terrorism, anti-smuggling, for conflict zone, a demilitarist zone to control a territory, etc. The walled solution responds to an emergency. It solves nothing and ends up falling. The analysis in my study was phenomenological, that is to say, the description of what is perceived, to understand the wall as an object and a medium in itself. These new walls crystallize a deep malaise that we aim to clarify through art. However, can art make a conflict universal? The wall becomes the display of an event. How not to fall into cliches? My methodology was simple, starting from an historical iconography of the border wall around three axes: dogma, myth, defense. It shows the common points of the interpretations. From these characteristics, I landed on the new geopolitical genesis of the contemporary walls. I could then analyze the flaws and shortcomings of the system and put all together around 300 key artists to understand the phenomenon. A part of the historical, I showed three contemporary walls: Berlin, Israel-Palestine, Mexico, US. I forced the comparisons because the Iron Curtain of the Cold War came from an explicit authoritarian regime, but still it was a symbol, a concrete materiality of the 20th century. I wondered how native, diasporic, and foreign artists would respond to this excess artificiality. As sensors of the environment and public space, how the artists capture this object, this ephemeral medium, this device resulting from a precise geopolitical context. What forms of dissent, transgression, commitment, resistance, imaginary come into play? How do visual artists perceive and express the conflict zone? And last but not least, if the wall is made mobile by creation, to what extent? So I will present you some key examples to give you an idea of the research. So first, the history of border wall aesthetics. The artistic interpretation of the wall makes a constant back and forth with the notion of border. Its aesthetic can find its origin in the belief in gods and the protection of a group. For example, in ancient Egypt, the worship of the Aten god, the sun god, you can see here with the circle, allows the border, thanks to the marking of stelae. Or during the Roman royalty, at the founding of Rome by Romulus, a worship was held to the Terminus god in a dedicated sanctuary at the top of the Capitoline Hill. Ovid praised him. You set bounds to people, cities, great kingdoms. Without you, every field will be disputed. You curry no favor. You are ribbed with gold, guarding the lands entrusted to you in good faith. The statue of Terminus marks out the territory. Its sacred value force respect. Also, walled cities fuel myth. We think of Jericho, for instance, or Troy. The wall of the mythical Troy is said to have been built by Apollo and Poseidon. Illuminations, like here from the Middle Ages, are useful. In particular, the entrance of the house into the city. And this episode was repeated in 1997 by Eren, the artist Eren. I show you here a pic. Above border stone between San Diego and Tijuana is monumental wooden sculpture as two heads who look towards each border. A ladder between the pedestal and the flank of the animal suggests the possible strategy. Myth, as a tool, is transposed on a delicate territory. The artist then raises questions like incursion, interbreeding, to keep distance from the disturbed border situation. The representation of civil and military defense magnifies the architectural work. One thinks of the Wall of Constantinople, for instance, of the Roman lines, also synonymous with trade zones, and of course of the Great Wall of China, whose aesthetic production will take place over the centuries, with both natives and foreign. In contemporary art, the best known example can be the 1988 performance made by Marina Brahmovic and Ulaine. In a 90-day spiritual trip, they travel from one hand to the other, the 5,000 kilometers of the Dragoon, to meet in the middle to create their last artwork, to break up, metamorphosed by this extreme experience. So I don't have time to explain each geopolitical aspect, but please, if you are interested, I'm setting up an Instagram account, Border Wall Aesthetic, and here you can add more details and visuals and everything. So the next part will be the contemporary wars as such, with the Berlin Wall of the 20th century. It's from the 20th century that artists directly appropriate the phenomenon. With a perspective of 60 years of creation, Berlin is a really strong point. So I lived there and I could understand that. As a reminder, the Iron Curtain was almost 1,400 kilometers long from the Baltic Sea to Czechoslovakia. The Berlin Wall was 155 kilometers long, in total of which 43 kilometers to avoid the to enter into the Western Germany. So for the GDR, I show you, an infrastructure. The GDR began its construction on the night of August 12 to 13, 1961. The regime officially defended itself against any Western influence. Liberal democracy, capitalist economy, powerful bourgeoisie, individual initiative, NATO, etc. Concerning the aesthetic corpus, Joseph Beuys is a landmark artist because it goes beyond any kind of expectations. Beuys, in spite of himself, was labeled as West German artist. So he will play with this particular position. The artists of the FRG were able to develop more conceptual artists, minimalism, prefiguration, happenings, video art, body art, etc. On the contrary, Eastern artists were more under control restriction under the ministries of culture, under the Stasi, etc. Art had to serve the political ideology. The hijackings remains with the appeal of poets in Prenzlauer Berg, Berlin, for instance, with private living room galleries, with artistic festival in the countryside, with art postal too. The Kunstpostal initiated by Robert Redfeld of the Fluxus movement was an exchange of fancy letters between geographically distant artists, with Paul Forster, Clément Badin, for instance, who could escape any controls. So to come back to Beuys, in 1964, he recommends to increase the wall by 5 centimeters. The proportions would then finally become credible and aesthetic. This way, it could go beyond the physical wall and beyond the mental one, the one who restricts freedom. The fulfillment of the human being goes through art. Art is life, life is art. His belief remains the following: art equals capital. It refers to art that can influence society through the questions it asks. In 1986, he claimed that the private capitalist system and the communist system both contributed to the creations of the war. After having been confronted with this obscene object for 20 years, he started to think of it as an artwork. According to Beuys, the relationship to this zone situated between two ideologies symbolically announced a future social order. No doubt that Beuys was a total visionary artist. So another point, muralism is of course in border wall aesthetics very important, but I rather showed you other alternatives, other ways. I think it's more interesting. So now An important case in the 21st century is the separation barrier between Palestine and Israel. Show you here a map made by Richard Hamilton, a pop artist, where we see clearly the diminution of the land. Simply to tell you that resistance to the Israel-Palestine conflict also involves artistic creation, including an epidemial effect against the concrete wall. The entire structure will be 708 kilometers long, but the concrete part, which is impressive with 8 meters high, is only 5%. So this is only a tip of an iceberg. To better understand here, in aesthetics, I will give you a key example with the installation made in 2005 by Banksy. The graffiti artist Banksy summarizes the complexity, the ambivalence of the geopolitical situation. His first approach took place on portions of this concrete wall on the Palestinian side between Jerusalem and the West Bank. The context of Palestine is as the largest open-air prison in the world, and that of graffiti as a traditional medium used for denunciation reach here the climax of the double form of illegality. The following conversation was said to have occurred as Banksy walked. An old man. You paint the wall, you make it beautiful. Banksy, thanks. Old man. We don't want it to be beautiful. We hate this wall. Go home. The messages expressed in Banksy's graffiti are mainly related to evasion. Dotted lines, window, ladder, balloons, and next hope for an idyllic landscape on the other side, with forest, mountain. However, this ideal projection for the Palestinians was sometimes out of step with their realities, habits, and costumes. The inscription Control-Alt-Delete suggests the wall should be erased. The Palestinians are represented by a young girl, flying with a batch of balloons, or patting down an IDF soldier. Why make the wall beautiful? To give it an award, as any work of art? If this is exactly what bothers people, if this intrudes into the social and political environment. The wall is not democratic, but art democratizes it. It becomes a media display of a geopolitical event. So briefly, another work made the same year, 2005, which I particularly like, is the West Bank photo project made by Sophie Risteluber. We see here the scars, bounds, wounds of the roads, plenty of craters, irregularities. We understand this evocation. This is the pain of the geographic and human territory, linked to the presence of the separation barrier. And the last one, the secure border between Mexico and the United States. In 2009, I analyzed this barrier, and as you know, since then, during the Trump presidency, it becomes a big hit. Currently, about 1/3 of the total length, 3,145 kilometers, is secured. This testifies to a long mutual history and economic interdependence. In 1948, the Treaty of Guadalupe recomposed the map and signed a consequent loss of territory for Mexico. You can see here. Today, the huge budget for securities does not prevent the informal economy, abusive work, traffic of all kinds, bilateral corruption, nor the 400 or so annual deaths. nor the complete crossing of immigrants. The danger has become much more serious because the crossed areas are more hostile. A rock made by the international Frida Kahlo, it was made in 1932, clearly evokes the ambiguity of the border. In a self-portrait on the borderline between Mexico and the US, the artist is the fulcrum of the painting. On the left is a Mexican landscape, while on the right is a US landscape, recognizable by its flag, smoking chimneys, high buildings. There are small electric appliances at Kahlo's foot. The feet here, yeah. In contrast with the real woods of plants and flowers. Here, the middle ground on the left side shows pre-Columbian sculpture, a skull and hands by an Aztec monument. The mental and physical sharing of Frida Kahlo takes the viewer to witness. Her right hand holds a small Mexican flag, suggesting a territorial preference. Identity is hybrid, typical of the realities of the Chicanos and other multicultural people intermingling within the US. So I will end this expose with a recent artistic proposal. In 2018, artist Joseph Beuys, with his collective MAGA, Make America Great Again, launched a petition. He wanted to register the 8 wall prototypes of Trump as national monuments under the Antiquities Act. The event organized guided to around the area. He also announced the US president to be the best found artist ever. This provocation answered the absurdity of the situation. When the incontainable makes politics, artists counter-square with just as much virulence. So if, therefore, each border infrastructure seems hard to enter, it usually stimulates alternatives, twists and turns, tunnels, traffic, smuggling, diplomatic espionage. The same occurs to the aesthetic field. The static border wall invites to multidisciplinary and mobility, with poems, music, engraving, painting, performance, installation, etc. Some artists and activists are constantly mobilizing. The stake is crucial because this type of wall has become the unfortunate poster of the state of the globalized world. But the artists who really take the time to understand the intricacies of the conflict zone are better able to create works adapted to reality. Their creation can thus awaken awareness without playing on the Manichaeism advocated by the border wall. That's it. Thank you for listening. I'm online. If you have any questions from my critiques, I'll be happy to answer, and see you. Thank you.